Hi guys and welcome. Today I am joined by our local governance expert from Worbli, Todor. Todor, I really appreciate you sitting down with me to talk about some of the hard issues and some of the questions that have been discussed in Telegram. So I just wanted to say welcome and it's a pleasure to have you on.
Hi Matt, thanks for having me. I'd love to answer any questions that you might have.
For sure, and I think that you're the man for these. I want to start off with a quote from Daniel Larimer, where Daniel said that decentralization isn't what we're after. Anti-censorship and robustness against being shut down is essentially what we're after. And I think that a lot of people kind of miss that and miss what EOS was trying to achieve. How do you think that a centralized start is kind of ideal for Worbli, and how do you see it transitioning over time?
Well, I agree that decentralization is not the goal. Decentralization is the means through which we achieve the goal. And like you said, that's anti-censorship, robustness against being shut down. And I would also add one more thing that is very important and that's enabled by blockchain tech, and that's transparency. And I actually think that that's what most people care about. They care about, especially when we are referring to any kind of governance structure that we've delegated to make decisions on behalf of the whole community. We want these people or organizations to be as transparent as possible, and that's one of the big use cases that are being enabled by blockchain in general. That it's actually a lot more transparent, and things cannot be hidden so easily. There's other ways to have privacy, not through blockchain tech. That's probably something that confuses many people, because there's this myth that blockchain and Bitcoin, for example, is anonymous, but that's totally opposite from the truth. Actually, blockchains enable everyone to see everything. And back to a question. In our case, in Worbli, we are starting off almost completely centralized. And why we're doing this is for several reasons, but I think the biggest benefit that we have from that is that we are going to be able to work on perfecting our process and evolving our system as much as we can before becoming more decentralized. Because to me, decentralization is just really good at keeping the status quo. For example, in Bitcoin, for example, you have pretty good decentralization, and people are able to transact with each other without going through a middleman. But that involves very simple transactions. And as soon as we start talking about something more subjective or something more complex, it's very difficult to get everyone to agree on the same way to approach things. For example, I'd like to give this example. Have you ever been in a room with, let's say, 20 people trying to come up with a solution to a problem? And did it work out without having a clear leader of that group?
No.
Probably not, yeah. And you can imagine what it is for a whole community. And we can see that. If you've been in the EOS Gov channel, you'll see that people cannot agree on the simplest things. So as soon as we have our process ironed out, we will benefit a lot from decentralization, because this will keep the processes being good, and it will keep the system stable, because it will be very hard to change it. It will require very good consensus of all the network participants in order to change the system. But we're not there yet. We need to do a lot of work in order to create our good processes, and I think Worbli is going to benefit a lot from being centralized in the beginning.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're right. A lot of people, when you're trying to make decisions, is a much slower process, and And in the start, you want to knock out all the bugs and get everything set. And as you kind of said, it's good for maintaining the status quo once you have a system in place. So ultimately, we create that system and then kind of move to a more decentralized once we know everything works. So that's a really good explanation, and I appreciate it. I want to talk to you about something else that's a little bit of a hot topic, of course, in a lot of the telegrams. And we're going to chat about KYC. And a lot of people are asking, how is Worbli going to manage the separation of users' KYC data from people's EOS accounts?
Oh, that's kind of a difficult question. Well, first of all, there's not going to be any direct link between an EOS account and a corresponding Worbli account that has received the share drop. Yeah. We're talking just about the share drop here. That's where a potential link could appear. But yeah, like I said, there's no direct link because the way it works is that when a user creates a Worbli on-chain account, they just prove ownership on our backend, on our website, by signing transactions on the EOS mainnet with their EOS mainnet account. But that does not link the Worbli account. It's just linked on our site for a very short amount of time, and then that link is deleted, and then there's actually no link between the two accounts. And also we have the actual KYC data, the identity of a Worbli account, is not public. It's only available to the dApps that the user has authorized to see their info. And that said, though, it might be very difficult for users that want to have no link between their EOS and Worbli account to achieve that, because these kind of things are subject to data analysis. So let's say you have a specific number of EOS tokens in your EOS account, and then you receive a share drop for this exact same amount of tokens. How many people have this exact same amount of tokens as you do, And when you start putting timestamps together, it might become difficult to hide from data analysis. And I've always given that example with the privacy currencies that exist, like Zcash and Monero. They're supposed to be private, but they're also vulnerable to data analysis. The larger the amount that you transact with, the easier it is to make the link between an account and the transaction that it has made. So we've been considering eventually implementing some ways to protect users who want to claim their share drop from data analysis, but that's kind of a rabbit hole. It's very difficult to do that really well. We would have, for example, we'd have to add a random number or subtract a random number to the share drop, introduce time delays and stuff like that, and that's not something that we will launch with, but we might consider it if there's enough interest from users.
It's a really good breakdown. What I'm basically hearing you say is that the KYC data is stored separately. There's no link to the identity of the owner. That's kept privately by Worbli. However, if somebody really wanted to see, Johnny has 3,251 EOS, they might be able to find a provable transition from that account into the Worbli account, but the KYC data is not stored, available on the blockchain, available for anybody to be able to analyze. But you would potentially be able to see where it kind of came from the EOS mainnet into the Worbli, and you guys are working on solutions potentially in the future to maybe be able to throw some things in there. But the user data, their identity as such, isn't necessarily associated with the account.
Yeah, I just want to say that it's any link that can be derived through data analysis is not provable. It's just some probability.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Makes sense. I think a follow-up question that might be, how can Worbli kind of guarantee the user safety in regards to their data from KYC? Where will it be stored and for how long?
Okay, so we have a short-term approach for how we're dealing with this, and then we'll be upgrading our model in the relatively near term to a more secure approach. So the short-term approach that we have is we take the user's data from the third party that we use to verify the user's identity. We encrypt it, and this is managed. The encryption and the decryption, when needed, is managed by Worbli on behalf of the users. So whenever a user approves a request from a dApp to see part of their data, their personal info, we automatically decrypt it and provide it to that developer based on the user's approval. And we kind of have a very secure infrastructure for storing the data. It's in a kind of a cold storage. It's stored online, but not on a blockchain, because if it's stored on a blockchain, it cannot be deleted. And we wanna be sure that that data can be deleted for various reasons. One reason could be GDPR, for example. Another reason would be that if it's stored on a blockchain, what happens in 10 years when the encryption is broken? It's still there and practically public for everyone. So that's why we don't really want to store personal info on the blockchain, even encrypted. So the long-term approach that we have, though, is a lot more interesting, I would say. It actually involves encrypting each user's personal information with their own key that's not known by Worbli. And this way, each user has individually encrypted, and only they have access to their to decrypting their information. And this would prevent mass user information leaks that we've seen recently happen with many providers. Even Facebook and Google have been subject to these things. I think the Pentagon was there was a leak from a lot of Pentagon accounts recently as well.
Yeah,
and this would not be possible with this approach, because a hacker would actually have to compromise each user individually in order to gain access to their information. So that's our long-term plan for storing user information.
Very cool. Yeah, it sounds fantastic. And I know that you also spoke about possibly the development later on of a new way to be able to manage that information, which is something that's kind of going on in the background, which could potentially lead to access for some of the countries that may be underbanked or unbanked.
Yeah, well, that's probably a very long-term plan, and it's not something that I can promise even a date for, but we've been discussing eventually. Right now, we're using one third party to gather and verify the user's identity. Eventually, in the future, we may use multiple such third parties, and which would create competition between them. So that would kind of prevent them from becoming the middleman, and also it would enable different parts of users' identity to be verified by different providers. For example, people in let's say Kenya have a different concept of identity than people in, say, the US. So a provider that's based in somewhere in Africa could have more relevant identity details for these for locals, for example, or there could be use cases that are not based on locality, but just on requirements by certain dApps. Some dApps might need your birth date and name and address, but another dApp might need something completely different. Let's say an insurance would need a lot more information, and that would be enabled by different identity providers. And competition is also a very big thing, because that keeps these providers on their toes and makes sure they have good service for the users.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a race to the bottom, as Dominic likes to refer to it. The last question I wanted to ask you was I also brought up in the Telegram, and that was how does dispute resolution on Worbli vary from that of mainnet, and why?
Well, first of all, we have one very big thing that the EOS mainnet doesn't, and that's identity, and that makes our job much easier. If you look at the cases that have been made public on the EOS mainnet, they're almost exclusively account hacks, phishing, stuff like that. People losing access to their account, or EOS being transferred away from their account by someone else, by a hacker. And this is much easier to take care of if we know the identity of the account owner. So that's one thing that's going for us pretty well, I would say. Also, I would say that right now in EOS, we have dispute resolution that's handling cases that are not exactly disputes. These are actually cases of system abuse. And they're being handled by dispute resolution because that's the structure that we have on the EOS mainnet that's set up to resolve such cases, to enforce the rules. But that's kind of a catch-all. It catches these cases because there is no separate service that's been developed to handle this specific use case. And with the centralized approach that we have in the beginning, we can see the data of what kinds of complaints we receive, and build a service that's specifically suited to that use case. It does not need to involve highly paid to resolve these cases, and does not need to take several months. I think that we will be able to build more appropriate services for handling different types of situations where the rules of the system are broken. And once we do that, we can then, like I talked in the beginning, we can then start decentralizing the process. But first, we need to make this process good, and so that they make sense, for the network.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of build the processes out, use some data to be able to make an analysis on what's viable, what's not viable, what's the quickest way to proceed with each case, and then, of course, move towards something more decentralized. I think it's great. It's a fantastic solution. Todor, I know you're a busy man. I don't want to keep you any longer, but I just want to say thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been a pleasure speaking with you as always, and I look forward to chatting with you again and watching everything that is the Worbli project unfold.
It's been a pleasure for me as well. Thank you, Matt, for having me.
Thank you, my friend. We'll see you soon.
Enjoy your day.
You too.
Bye.